My name is Ella Hunter. I am 27 years old. You ever have one of those ordinary afternoons where the world feels steady, your coffee is still warm, and then a single phone call yanks the rug out from under everything you thought you knew about the people who raised you? That was me last spring, sitting in my home office overlooking the rolling green hills of our affluent enclave here in Eugene, Oregon. The university's influence gives this whole area a quiet kind of polish, with tree-lined streets and modern homes tucked into the slopes. My husband and I had chosen this spot because it felt like the perfect place to build something real after years of grinding through our careers. I worked as a strategic planner for a university-affiliated community development firm, helping secure grants for sustainable hillside projects that actually made a difference in people's lives. I was good at it too, detail-oriented, and always thinking 3 steps ahead, the kind of person who double-checks every clause so no one gets hurt. That afternoon, the phone rang with my older brother's name on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail because he rarely called during work hours unless something was wrong. But something in my gut told me to pick up. "Hey, it's me," he said, his voice tight in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. "No, hello, no, how are you? Just straight into it. We've got a situation with the Ridgeview Heights development. My father and I need you to step in right now. The project's short $150,000 on the latest phase, and your professional endorsement is tied to the grant paperwork. You have to sign off on the adjustment or the whole thing collapses." I sat there frozen, the words landing like stones in my stomach. Ridgeview Heights was one of those community projects my firm had helped fund eco-friendly homes for the enclave, meant to preserve the natural beauty of the hills while giving local families a shot at ownership. I had spent months vetting the proposal, making sure every dollar was accounted for because that was my job, protecting the integrity of the grants. My older brother had been the lead developer on the private side, and my father had pushed hard for me to get involved as family. I thought I was helping build something good. Now this call was telling me otherwise. My hands started to shake as I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean, short? I reviewed those numbers myself 2 weeks ago. Everything was balanced." He let out a frustrated breath, the kind that always made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, things happen in construction. Costs went up. My father covered some of it out of pocket to keep things moving, but now we need you to authorize a reallocation from the contingency fund. It's not a big deal. You do this kind of thing all the time at work. Blood is thicker than some bureaucratic rule, right?" His voice softened just enough to slip in that familiar pull, the one that had worked on me for years. "We're family, Ella. This project is supposed to be our legacy in the hills. Don't make me beg." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes before I could stop them. I hated how vulnerable it made me feel, how quickly the old patterns rushed back in the way my older brother had always leaned on me for the practical stuff, the way my father had quietly nodded along like it was just how things worked. I thought about all the smaller things over the years, the times my older brother had asked me to look over contracts for his side ventures, the way my father would call late at night with some vague financial worry and end up leaving me to sort it out. I had told myself it was love that family stuck together even when it cost you sleep or peace of mind. But sitting there in my sunlit office with the hills stretching out like they had my back, something inside me cracked open. This didn't feel like support. It felt like I was being used as a safety net again, and the net was starting to fray. My husband walked in just then, carrying 2 mugs of fresh coffee like he always did, when he sensed I was deep in something heavy. He set one down beside me and raised an eyebrow, mouthing everything okay. I gave him a small nod, but my eyes must have given away more because he stayed leaning against the doorframe with that steady presence that had gotten me through so many rough patches. My older brother's tone sharpened. "Ella, come on." My father's already stretched thin on this. If this falls through, the whole enclave board is going to look at us sideways. You know how tight-knit this community is. Do you really want to be the one who tanks a project that was supposed to bring everyone together? He was laying it on thick, the guilt wrapping around my chest like vines. I felt that familiar pull, the emotional weight of being the reliable one. the strategic one who could always fix things. But this time, it landed differently. My heart was pounding, not just with anger, but with a deep, aching sadness. Why did it always have to be me covering the gaps? Why did blood ties feel like chains the moment I tried to stand on my own? My husband stepped closer and rested a hand on my shoulder. His touch grounded me enough to speak again. I'm not saying no to family, but I'm saying I need transparency. Send me the updated reports and I'll review them properly. My older brother muttered something under his breath about me always making things harder than they needed to be, then hung up without a real goodbye. I set the phone down slowly, staring at the screen until it went dark. My husband pulled up a chair beside me. "Talk to me," he said gently. I let the tears come, then just a few quiet ones that slipped down my cheeks as I told him what my older brother had said. My husband listened the way he always does without jumping in to fix it, just holding space for how much it hurt. "You don't have to carry this alone," he reminded me. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." That evening I tried to push through my usual routine, but the unease wouldn't leave me. I kept replaying the call the way my older brother's voice had shifted from urgent to entitled so quickly. Later, while my husband and I were eating a simple dinner on the back patio with the hills glowing soft gold in the sunset, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number, but the subject line made my stomach drop. Internal memo Ridgeview Heights discrepancies. Attached was a scanned document marked confidential, the kind that never should have left our firm's secure server. It detailed several covered-up money moves, line items shifted without proper approval contingency, funds quietly redirected, and my professional stamp appearing on approvals I had never seen. The memo was signed off by someone in accounting, but the notes in the margin mentioned conversations with my father and my older brother. I stared at the screen, the vulnerable part of me wanting to believe it was a mistake, that blood couldn't possibly run this cold. But the strategic side, the one that had built my career on spotting patterns others missed, knew better. This wasn't an accident. This was years of small violations adding up to something deliberate, something that used my name and my reputation as cover. My hands trembled as I showed my husband the memo. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening. "This changes everything," he said softly. I nodded, feeling the weight of it settle deep in my chest, not just anger, but a profound, aching sense of loss. The family I had trusted with my professional life had been moving money behind my back, counting on my loyalty to keep their secrets safe. The next morning I woke up with a heavy heart but a clearer mind. I forwarded the memo to my secure work email and scheduled a quiet meeting with my trusted colleague, Vanessa Klein, the senior advisor who had mentored me through some of the toughest grants. I didn't want to drag her into family drama, but I needed someone objective to look at this before it spiraled. Vanessa had always been straight with me, the kind of person who valued integrity above everything. When I sat down with her in the firm's small conference room overlooking the same hills I saw from home, I laid out the basics without naming names at first. Her expression shifted from concern to guarded as she scanned the memo I had printed. "Ella, this looks bad," she said carefully. "If your family connections are tied to these discrepancies, the board is going to ask questions about your oversight. I have to ask, are you sure you're not too close to this to see it clearly?" Her words stung more than I expected. Here was someone I respected questioning my judgment because of family, and it made the vulnerability I'd been carrying feel even heavier. I wanted to defend them, to say it was just a misunderstanding, but the memo was right there in black and white. My older brother had initiated the pressure, my father had enabled it, and now it was bleeding into the one place I had always kept clean: my work. I left the meeting feeling raw and exposed the emotional toll of it all pressing down on me as I drove back through the winding roads of the enclave. That night, my mother called, her voice full of that familiar mix of worry and expectation. She asked if I had heard from my older brother and hinted that the project was a family effort that needed all of us pulling together. I kept my responses short, the ache in my chest making it hard to speak freely. My husband sat beside me on the couch, his hand in mine, reminding me without words that I didn't have to carry this burden alone. But even with his support, the betrayal felt deeply personal, like the blood ties I had always leaned on were the very things now pulling me under. I went to bed that night with tears drying on my pillow, wondering how long I could keep setting boundaries before the people I loved most decided I was the problem. The next morning, the hills outside my window looked the same as always, but everything inside me had shifted in a way that left me feeling raw and unsteady. I sat at the kitchen island, with my coffee growing cold, the insider memo still open on my laptop, and let the tears come quietly because there was no one there to see them except my husband. He had stayed up late with me the night before, listening without trying to fix it, just holding my hand while I poured out how deeply the betrayal cut. Blood ties had masked the truth for so long that I had stopped noticing the small ways my older brother and my father had leaned on me, expecting my strategic mind and my clean professional reputation to smooth over whatever gaps appeared in their plans. Now those same ties felt like they were pulling me under, and the vulnerability of it all made my chest ache with a sadness I couldn't quite name. My husband poured fresh coffee for both of us and sat across from me, his presence the only steady thing in the fog of my emotions. I told him again about the memo, how the covered-up money moves were hidden in those contingency lines, how my professional stamp had been used without my full knowledge to keep the Ridgeview Heights project looking perfect on paper. The words came out shaky, laced with the hurt that had been building for years, the quiet times my older brother had asked me to just sign off on something small, the late-night calls from my father that always ended with me sorting through the details so the family name stayed strong in our affluent hillside enclave. My husband didn't push or offer quick solutions. He simply reminded me that I didn't have to carry this alone, that whatever came next, we would face it together. His gentle support let me breathe a little easier, but the emotional weight still sat heavy on my shoulders as I tried to get through the day. Later that afternoon, I met with Vanessa again in the firm's quiet conference room, the same hills visible through the windows like a reminder of everything at stake for the community. She had gone over the memo I sent her in more detail, and her expression was more serious this time, her voice careful but direct. "Ella, I have to ask this because I care about you and about the firm," she said, leaning forward. "This situation is making people question your loyalty here. If your family connections are this involved in the discrepancies, the board is going to want answers, and I can't keep shielding you forever. Are you sure you're seeing the full picture clearly, or is the family pull making it harder to be objective?" Her words landed like another layer of doubt on top of everything else, deepening the secondary conflict I felt inside. Here was someone I had trusted completely, someone who had mentored me through tough grants, now gently questioning whether my blood ties were clouding my judgment. The vulnerability hit me hard. I felt tears sting my eyes as I assured her I was looking into every detail, but the conversation left me drained and second-guessing myself all the way home through the winding enclave roads. That evening, my father called. His voice was lower than usual, almost hesitant, which was so unlike the confident man who had always steered family decisions. We talked around the edges for a minute before he got to the point, and what he said next became the twist that cracked something open inside me. "Ella, your older brother, mentioned the memo you received," he began slowly. "We've had to move things around before you know. A few years back, with an earlier phase of the development, we shifted some funds the same way to keep everything afloat. Your endorsements and your reputation helped keep it quiet. No one asked questions because it was family looking out for family. I never thought it would come to light like this, but it was always for the good of the enclave and our standing here." His admission hung in the air between us, confirming that this wasn't a one-time panic, but a pattern of covered-up money moves that had relied on my name and my work without me ever knowing the full cost. The emotional weight of it crashed over me. I sat there on the edge of the couch with tears streaming down my face, the phone pressed to my ear, feeling the profound ache of realizing how deeply the people I loved had hidden the truth behind blood ties. I barely managed a response, my voice barely above a whisper as I told him I needed time, then ended the call before the sobs took over completely. My husband found me there a few minutes later and pulled me close, letting me cry without trying to rush me through it. The vulnerability I felt in those moments was deeper than anything I had experienced, before the sadness of seeing how my older brother's initial demand had opened the door to all of this, how my father's quiet betrayals had been going on longer than I wanted to admit. I thought about all the times I had stepped in because it felt like the right thing for family, the way my strategic planning skills had quietly propped up their projects while I told myself it was love. Now it felt like those same skills had been used against me, and the realization left me emotionally exhausted. The following day, I reached out to Claire Stanton, the project manager on Ridgeview Heights, a colleague I had worked with closely on the grant side, but never in a personal way. She agreed to meet me at a small cafe on the edge of the enclave, away from the firm and away from prying eyes. Claire was straightforward and kind, the kind of person who noticed details others missed. When I showed her a redacted version of the memo, her expression tightened. "I've seen some of these line items flagged internally," she said quietly, her voice carrying the same concern I felt. "The shifts weren't accidental, Ella. They benefited my father's side interests and my older brother's development company more than the community housing we were supposed to be building. I didn't say anything before because it seemed like family business, but if this is affecting your standing at the firm, you need to protect yourself." Her words added another layer of evidence and another wave of sadness. Even outsiders had noticed the pattern, and yet I had been the last to see it clearly. We talked for nearly an hour, her support feeling like a small lifeline in the midst of the emotional storm, and by the time I left, I had a clearer picture of just how extensive the covered-up money moves had been. My older brother kept the pressure coming through a string of texts and a late afternoon call, his tone shifting between urgency and that familiar mix of entitlement and guilt. "The board is starting to ask questions about the delays," he said, his voice tight. "My father and I need you to sign off on the adjustment today, Ella. This is our legacy in the hills. Don't let a few accounting details tear it apart." The demand landed heavily, stirring up the same vulnerable ache I had been carrying since the first call. I could hear my father in the background on the call murmuring something about family sticking together, and it only made the sadness deeper. I told my older brother I was still reviewing everything and hung up before the tears started again, my husband's hand on my back, the only thing grounding me. As the week unfolded, the emotional toll showed in small ways, sleepless nights where I stared at the ceiling, replaying my father's admission, quiet moments at work where Vanessa's question about my loyalty echoed in my mind, the way the enclave's beautiful hillside views now felt tainted by the knowledge of what had been hidden there. I found myself pulling back more, setting small boundaries that felt enormous, like declining my mother's invitation to a casual family dinner, because the thought of sitting across from my older brother and my father made my stomach twist with hurt. My husband supported every step, reminding me that protecting my peace wasn't selfish. Yet the vulnerability remained, this quiet grief over the family. I thought I knew the blood ties that had once felt like safety, now revealing themselves as something more complicated and painful. By the end of that week, I had started compiling my own notes, cross-referencing the memo with everything I could access, legally, feeling the strategic part of me slowly waking up even as the emotional part stayed tender and exposed. The secondary conflict with Vanessa lingered too. She checked in once more, her concern genuine, but her questions about my ability to separate family from work, leaving me raw all over again. Then a new message came through from my older brother, this one more pointed, mentioning that the community board, including Elena Vargas, the chair who had always praised our family's involvement in the enclave, would be reviewing the project finances soon. The implication was clear. If I didn't help smooth things over, the scrutiny could spread beyond the firm and into the tight-knit world we all lived in. The pressure built to a quiet peak, leaving me standing at the edge of a decision I wasn't sure I was ready to make. My heart heavy with the knowledge that setting firmer boundaries might mean walking away from pieces of my life I had once held dear. The board meeting happened 2 days later in the community centre, nestled against the hillside, a neutral space where neighbours and project stakeholders gathered to review the Ridgeview Heights finances. Elena Vargas presided with her usual poised efficiency, and I sat near the back with my husband beside me for support, my hands clasped tightly in my lap as the discussion turned to the discrepancies. My older brother spoke first, his presentation smooth and confident, painting the adjustments as minor course corrections that any family-run development would make. My father nodded along from his seat, the picture of quiet authority. But when Eleanor Vargas asked for supporting documentation, the room grew tense and I felt the vulnerability surge as all eyes turned toward our family's corner. I stood slowly, my voice trembling at first but growing steadier as I spoke. I shared a carefully prepared summary of the insider memo leak and the pattern it exposed, focusing on the covered-up money moves that had relied on my professional endorsements without full transparency. I didn't raise my voice or accuse dramatically. I simply laid out the facts with the same strategic clarity I used at work, mentioning my father's own admission about past shifts. The room fell into a heavy silence. Elena Vargas thanked me for my candour, her expression thoughtful as she noted that an official complaint would be filed internally to review the project's oversight. My older brother's face tightened with frustration, and my father looked away, the weight of the moment settling over them in a way that made the community standing they had cultivated in the enclave begin to quietly fracture. No dramatic scene unfolded, just the slow, inevitable fallout of actions finally catching up to words. In the weeks that followed the board's quiet investigation, the consequences rippled through our hillside community without fanfare. Word spread in the subtle way it does in tight-knit enclaves, whispers at neighbourhood gatherings, careful questions from long-time neighbours, a noticeable cooling in invitations to local events. My older brother and my father saw their development reputation take a hit with future phases of Ridgeview Heights stalled and their standing among the enclave's influential families diminished. My mother tried reaching out a few times, her messages laced with the same emotional appeals that had once pulled me back in, but each one only deepened the vulnerable ache I felt and strengthened my resolve. I responded once, calmly explaining that I needed permanent space to protect the life my husband and I had built, and then I stopped answering altogether. The no-contact boundary settled into place like a quiet door closing, not with anger, but with the fierce, quiet independence that had been growing inside me all along. My husband and I spent the following months focusing on the small, steady joys of our life together. The weekend hikes along the enclave trails, the quiet evenings planning our own sustainable projects that felt honest, and ours alone. The secondary conflict with Vanessa resolved fully when the firm cleared my name, internally affirming that my actions had protected the grants rather than compromised them. Yet even with that professional piece, the emotional cost remained. Walking away from the blood ties that had shaped so much of my world left a loneliness I hadn't anticipated, a quiet isolation that sometimes caught me off guard during quiet moments on the patio. I missed the illusion of family closeness the way it had once made the hills feel like home in a deeper sense. But in its place grew something truer, a fierce, quiet independence that came from finally choosing myself, from recognizing that actions, not words, prove real loyalty. Looking back now, the strength in detachment feels like the hardest lesson I've ever learned. Blood ties masked the truth for years, letting covered-up money moves and quiet betrayals slide under the surface until an insider memo leak forced everything into the light. My older brother's demands had been the spark, my father's admission, the confirmation, but the real turning point was my own vulnerable decision to stop covering for them. The community fallout that followed wasn't loud or vengeful. It was simply the natural consequence of choices finally exposed, leaving their standing in the enclave quietly diminished, while I stepped back into my own life. There was no grand victory, no dramatic reconciliation, just the peaceful, sometimes lonely quiet of boundaries that finally held. I sit here today with the hills stretching out unchanged beyond our windows, feeling the full weight of that quiet closure. The sadness still visits on certain evenings, a tender reminder of what was lost, but beneath it lives a calm, fierce independence I never knew I needed. My husband and I have built something solid here, free from the hidden pressures that once defined my role in the family. And, while the no-contact boundary means some doors stay closed forever, it has opened space for a life that finally feels like my own. Thank you for listening to my story. Would you cut contact?